I smiled. It was the kind of smile that made my cheeks burn and my jaw pop, but I held it. I held it like a carbon steel shield. Careful with the doorframe, Beatrice, I chirped, my voice dripping with so much artificial sweetness, I practically gave myself a cavity on the spot. That vintage Louis Vuitton looks heavy. Beatrice didn't even look at me. She just kept hauling a massive, obnoxiously floral suitcase over the threshold, the metal wheels gouging tiny permanent trenches into my pristine oak floors. Following right behind her was Chloe, my beloved stepsister, aggressively chewing a piece of bubble gum while holding a designer hat box like it was a royal artifact. "The lighting in this hallway is aggressively yellow, Harper," Beatrice announced as her opening greeting. Not hello, not thank you for letting us crash at your place, just immediate, unfiltered criticism. She dropped the suitcase with a heavy thud that rattled the coat rack. "And it smells like... what is that? Lavender? You know I'm sensitive to artificial scents. We're going to have to air this place out." "I'll open a window," I said, my smile unwavering. "We wouldn't even be here if your father hadn't insisted on that ridiculous fumigation," Beatrice huffed, peeling off her silk gloves and tossing them onto my kitchen counter. "Apparently the main house has a termite issue. I told him we should just get a suite at the Four Seasons, but he muttered something about expenses and said we should stay with you. Family bonding, he called it." Family bonding, right. "It's so cramped," Chloe whined, finally speaking up as she surveyed my 800-square-foot downtown sanctuary with utter disgust. "Where am I supposed to put my shoes? I have like 3 trunks of just shoes." "We'll make it work, sweetie," Beatrice soothed, patting her daughter's arm before turning her sharp, hawkish gaze on me. "Now, obviously, I'll be taking the master bedroom. My back simply cannot handle a guest mattress, and Chloe needs the second bedroom for her streaming setup. You don't mind taking the sofa for a few weeks, do you, Harper? It's only fair, considering we're guests." In another life, I said no. In another life, I crossed my arms, stood my ground, and told her that this was my apartment, that I paid the rent, and that if she didn't like the setup, she could take her floral suitcases straight back to the suburbs. In that life, I fought back. I screamed about boundaries, I demanded basic respect, and in that life, I died, literally. The memory of it hit me so hard my breath hitched, a phantom chill sweeping through my veins, freezing the blood in my chest. I could still feel it, the absolute bone-deep agony of hypothermia. The way my fingers turned a sickly bruised blue. The way my wet eyelashes froze together every time I blinked against the howling January blizzard. They had planned it so perfectly then. The fumigation was just a foot in the door. Once they were inside, Beatrice had systematically gone to work on my spineless father. She convinced him that I was unstable, ungrateful, and incapable of handling the responsibility of a downtown apartment. Because my father was technically listed as a guarantor on my original lease. A stupid, naive mistake I made fresh out of college when my credit score was a ghost. Beatrice used that leverage to contact my landlord behind my back. They changed the lease. They changed the locks. I had just run down to the corner bodega for a carton of oat milk. I was wearing flannel pajama pants, a thin hoodie, and slip-on sneakers. When I came back, my key wouldn't turn. My phone was sitting on the kitchen counter inside, dead and useless. And when I looked up through the swirling, blinding snow, I saw Beatrice and Chloe standing in the warm, yellow glow of my living room window, looking down at me. Beatrice had held up my spare key, dropped it into a glass of wine, and closed the blinds. I froze to death on the curb, huddled under a bus stop shelter, my heart slowing to a pathetic, stuttering stop while my family slept in my bed. But the universe, it turns out, has a wickedly dark sense of humor. Because the moment my heart stopped in the freezing snow, my eyes snapped open, and I gasped in a lungful of warm, conditioned air. I was in my own bed. The calendar on my phone read exactly 3 months before the day I died. Rebirth. It wasn't just a trope in the web novels Chloe obsessed over. It was real, and it had handed me a loaded gun. Because when I woke up with the memory of my own icy death seared into my brain, I didn't cry. I didn't call my dad to scream at him. I got dressed, walked straight down to the property manager's office, and did a little legal housekeeping. What Beatrice didn't know as she stood in my kitchen criticizing my Lavender plugins was that my original lease, the one my father co-signed, expired in exactly 60 days. And yesterday I sat down with Mr. Henderson, my famously ruthless, money-obsessed landlord. I smiled, handed him a cashier's check covering 6 full months of rent in advance, and signed a brand new, ironclad 2-year lease renewal. The new lease didn't have my father's name on it. It didn't have a guarantor. It had one name and one name only, Harper. So, when Beatrice demanded my master bedroom, I didn't yell. I didn't fight. I just let that wide, terrifyingly cheerful smile stretch further across my face. Of course, Beatrice, I said, my voice as smooth as glass. You should absolutely take the master. And Chloe, the guest room is all yours. I'll clear out my things right now. The sofa is practically a cloud anyway. Beatrice blinked, clearly thrown off by my total lack of resistance. She had been bracing for a fight, her shoulders tense, ready to deploy the tears and the "you're so disrespectful" speech she had undoubtedly rehearsed in the Uber. My immediate surrender left her visibly deflated, like a balloon losing air with a pathetic squeak. Well, she sniffed, recovering quickly and adjusting the lapels of her pristine white blazer. I'm glad you're finally learning some basic hospitality. Go on then, get your things out. I need to unpack before my evening serum dries out. I grabbed a duffel bag from the hall closet and walked into my bedroom, my beautiful sunlit bedroom. I began pulling my clothes off the hangers, tossing them indiscriminately into the canvas bag. Every time I zipped a pocket, a memory of her psychological torture flashed behind my eyes. Zip. Beatrice accidentally donating my deceased mother's vintage jewelry box to Goodwill because it looked tacky sitting on the mantel in the family home. Zip. My father, standing in the doorway, rubbing the back of his neck and saying, Harper, please, just let it go. She didn't know. Don't make a big deal out of nothing. You know how sensitive Beatrice is. Zip. Chloe deciding she wanted my high school graduation dress the morning of the ceremony, throwing a tantrum until my father made me hand it over. I walked across the stage in a wrinkled sundress I found in the back of my closet, while Chloe sat in the front row, wearing my tailored silk gown, taking selfies. Zip. My father cutting off my college tuition halfway through my junior year because Beatrice convinced him that Chloe's influencer career required a $50,000 seed fund, leaving me to work triple shifts at a diner just to make rent. They had spent the last 10 years eroding my existence, erasing me from my own family, chipping away at my boundaries, my resources, and my dignity, until there was nothing left but a shell of a daughter who was too exhausted to fight back. My father was the worst part of it all. Beatrice was a snake. Yes, but a snake is just acting in its nature. My father was the zookeeper who kept opening the cage and pushing me inside just so he wouldn't have to listen to her hiss. He let them destroy me in my past life. He let them kill me. But this wasn't my past life, and I wasn't the tired, desperate girl begging for scraps of a father's love anymore. I was a ghost who had come back to haunt the very people who buried her. Harper! Chloe's shrill voice cut through my thoughts. Are you done yet? I need to set up my ring light, and your ugly lamps are in the way. Almost done, Chloe, I called back brightly. I took one last look around the master bedroom. I loved this room. I loved the way the morning light hit the exposed brick wall. I loved the reading nook I had built by the window. But right now, it wasn't my sanctuary. It was a trap. And I was laying the cheese. I hauled the duffel bag into the living room and dropped it onto the lumpy gray sofa. Beatrice was already in the kitchen, aggressively tossing my organic groceries into the trash can. I can't believe you eat this garbage, she muttered, dropping a perfectly good carton of almond milk into the bin. We're going to need to do a massive grocery run. I'll text your father to increase your allowance for the month. Oh, don't worry about it, I said, fluffing a throw pillow on the couch. I can just pay for it out of my savings. Beatrice paused, her perfectly manicured hand hovering over a bundle of kale. She looked at me, her eyes narrowing with sudden, predatory interest. Your savings? I didn't realize you had managed to save anything with your little assistant job. Oh, I've been very frugal, I lied effortlessly. In reality, I had completely emptied the joint bank account my father still had access to, transferring every single penny into a high-yield, offshore-level, secure account under an LLC I formed last week. But let her think I was flush with cash. Let her think there was blood in the water. Well, Beatrice said, a slow, malicious smile spreading across her lips. If you have extra funds lying around, perhaps you should contribute more to the household. After all, your father does so much for you. It's the least you could do while we're displaced. You're so right, Beatrice. I nodded eagerly, playing the absolute fool. Whatever you need, my home is your home. For exactly 60 days, I added silently. Tick-tock. The first night on the sofa was brutal, but not because of the springs digging into my spine. It was brutal because I had to listen to them. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to Chloe blast reality TV at maximum volume from the guest room, and hearing Beatrice loudly complain on the phone to one of her country club friends about how depressing my aesthetic was. "It's just so pedestrian, Martha," Beatrice's voice drifted through the thin walls. "I mean, the location is fabulous, right in the heart of the city. But the interior, it's like a prison cell. I don't know how the girl lives like this. Honestly, Richard and I are thinking we might just take this place off her hands eventually. Fix it up, use it as a pied-à-terre for when we want to see a show downtown. She can always find a cheaper place in the suburbs." My hands clenched into fists under the thin blanket. There it was. The seed of the plan that would eventually lead to my death. They were already plotting it on day one, but this time, I wasn't shivering in the snow. I was inside, I was warm, and I held all the cards. I rolled over, pulling the blanket up to my chin, and let out a soft, genuine laugh into the empty, dark living room. Go ahead, Beatrice, I thought, closing my eyes and letting the sheer, toxic euphoria of my secret advantage wash over me. Take my bed, throw away my food, plot your little takeover. I can't wait to watch you burn. The next morning, the game officially began. I woke up at 6 a.m., my back aching from the terrible sofa, but my mind was sharper than it had been in a decade. I quickly folded my blanket and shoved it into the closet, erasing any evidence of my discomfort before Beatrice emerged. I was standing at the kitchen counter, sipping a mug of black coffee, when Beatrice finally swept out of the master bedroom at 10 a.m., wearing a silk robe and a terrifyingly thick layer of night cream. "The water pressure in the shower is atrocious," was her morning greeting. "I feel like I was spit on by a very tired llama." "I'll call maintenance," I offered cheerfully. "Don't bother with maintenance, Harper. It's the fixtures. They're cheap." She waved a dismissive hand, walking over to the fridge and throwing the door open. "Where is the imported butter I asked your father to have delivered?" "It hasn't arrived yet," I said. She slammed the fridge shut. "Useless. Utterly useless. I swear, if this apartment didn't have such a prime address, I would have made Richard put us up in a hotel, but the bones of this place?" She looked around, her eyes trailing over the high ceilings and the large industrial windows. The greed in her gaze was palpable. It was a physical, pulsing thing. "The bones are good. It just needs a vision." "It really is a great space," I agreed, taking a slow sip of my coffee. "Sometimes I think it's wasted on me. I mean, I don't know the first thing about interior design. If you had this place, Beatrice, wow, I can't even imagine what you'd do with it. You have such incredible taste." I watched the flattery land. I watched her ego absorb it like a sponge, soaking up spilled wine. She puffed her chest out slightly, the annoyance fading from her face, replaced by a smug, self-satisfied glow. "Well, that's true," she murmured, walking over to the quartz island and tapping her manicured fingernails against the surface. "This countertop is an abomination. For mica? Really? In this zip code?" "I think it's laminate," I supplied helpfully. She shuddered dramatically. "Disgusting. If this were my place, I'd rip this out immediately, put in a solid slab of Calcutta marble. And the floors." She dragged the toe of her silk slipper across the oak. "They need to be refinished. A darker stain, ebony perhaps." "That sounds so expensive," I said, widening my eyes innocently. "I mean, I could never afford that. And the landlord, Mr. Henderson, he's so strict. He'd probably throw a fit if anyone tried to change anything." Beatrice scoffed, a harsh, ugly sound that echoed in the kitchen. "Please, landlords only care about property value. If you upgrade their dump, they don't say a word. And as for the money," she gave me a condescending, pitying look. "That's why you have a father, Harper. To pay for the things that matter." "Of course," I said softly, looking down at my mug to hide the vicious, feral smile that was threatening to break across my face. She had taken the bait. The hook was set deep in her cheek, and she didn't even feel the prick. Over the next few days, I played my part to perfection. I was the ghost in my own home. I went to work, came back, cleaned up their messes, and slept on the sofa. I listened to Chloe complain about my Wi-Fi speed. I watched Beatrice systematically replace all my toiletries with her expensive, imported brands. I let them push me into the corners of my own life. And every time they pushed, I leaned into it. I gave them more space. I gave them more control because every time I retreated, they expanded. And their expansion was going to cost them everything. By the end of the second week, my apartment no longer felt like mine. It was a museum of their vanity. Beatrice had systematically scrubbed away every trace of my personality. The framed vintage botanical prints I had spent months collecting at flea markets were unceremoniously unhooked and stacked in the hallway closet, replaced by gigantic, aggressively modern abstract canvases that looked like someone had sneezed acrylic paint onto a blank sheet of canvas. My comfortable linen throw pillows had been banished to the laundry room, swapped out for stiff velvet cushions covered in faux gold embroidery that stabbed you in the ribs if you dared lean against them. And Chloe? Chloe treated the second bedroom like a permanent broadcast studio and a personal dressing room combined. The hallway was a perpetual obstacle course of Amazon boxes, overflowing mesh garment bags, and half-empty energy drink cans. Whenever I walked past her open door, she wouldn't even look up from her ring light. "Harper, your footsteps are echoing through my microphone. Can you, float or something?" She'd snap mid-sentence in a video where she was dramatically complaining about how hard it was to be a micro-influencer in the city. "Sorry, Chloe," I'd whisper, scurrying past like a whipped terrier. It was a masterpiece of acting. Behind closed doors, however, my operations were moving with the cold, silent precision of a Swiss watch. The first thing I did was bulletproof my digital life. In my past life, Beatrice had managed to lock me out of my cloud storage, seized control of my email by guessing my pet's name, and completely isolated me from my professional network. This time, I didn't wait. I spent an entire Sunday evening wiping my old laptop, migrating everything to an encrypted zero-knowledge server, and setting up two-factor authentication tied to a brand-new burner-adjacent phone number that only my actual trusted friends knew about. My bank accounts were already secured. The joint account my father used to deposit my meager allowance had been drained down to a respectable $50, just enough to keep it active so he wouldn't suspect anything, while my actual paycheck from my marketing job was now routing directly into a newly minted credit union account under my LLC. Next came the physical surveillance. You can't rely on memory alone when you're orchestrating a multi-thousand-dollar legal trap. You need receipts. Discreetly, efficiently, I ordered 3 miniature, motion-activated security cameras that blended seamlessly into my existing decor. One was tucked neatly atop the bookshelf, angled to cover the entirety of the living room and kitchen entrance. The second was placed on the bookshelf in the hallway. The third? That one stayed in my duffel bag, ready for deployment when things really started heating up. Every conversation, every arrogant demand, every casual admission of their intent to permanently hijack my home was being captured in crystal-clear high definition. The turning point of the psychological trap happened on a rainy Tuesday evening. Beatrice was sitting at the kitchen island, furiously tapping away on her tablet, surrounded by glossy interior design magazines and color swatches of expensive tiles. She looked up as I walked in with a bag of groceries, her face pinched with manufactured stress. "Harper, we need to talk about the layout," she announced, as if she were the CEO calling an emergency board meeting. I paused, clutching my canvas grocery bag to my chest like a meek, obedient mouse. "About the layout, Beatrice?" "Yes, the kitchen is entirely dysfunctional. The workflow from the stove to the sink is an absolute tragedy." She shoved a magazine across the counter, pointing to a sprawling, industrial-chic kitchen lined with custom walnut cabinets and professional-grade stainless steel appliances. "We're going to tear out these base cabinets. Your father is wiring the funds for the contractor tomorrow morning." I swallowed, letting my eyes go wide with simulated anxiety. "Wait, tear out the cabinets? But Beatrice, Mr. Henderson, the landlord, he's so particular. He inspected the place before I moved in. He explicitly said no structural changes without prior written approval, and getting him to sign off on anything takes weeks." Beatrice let out a sharp, dismissive scoff, rolling her eyes so hard I thought they might get stuck. "Mr. Henderson is an absentee landlord who only cares about one thing, his check clearing on the first of the month. Your father has spoken to him twice about routine maintenance, and the man practically rolled out the red carpet. Honestly, Harper, you lack business acumen entirely. You let people walk all over you." "I just don't want you to get in trouble," I murmured, staring down at the floor as if I were too cowardly to meet her gaze. "We won't get in trouble because we know how to handle men like Mr. Henderson," Chloe chimed in, strutting into the kitchen with a fresh cup of matcha latte she had forced me to brew for her earlier. She leaned against the quartz wannabe counter, looking down her nose at me. "Mom is basically doing him a favor. This apartment was a sad, beige box before we got here. When we're done, it's going to look like a penthouse in Tribeca. And besides, Beatrice added smoothly, a dangerous, calculating glint in her eyes. By the time your little lease is up in a couple of months, we'll have invested so much capital into upgrading the property value that it only makes sense for the lease to be officially transferred to our names. Your father agrees. Why should you pay rent on a luxury asset you can't even style properly? There it is, I thought. The exact verbal confirmation of their land grab, caught live on my bookshelf camera. In my past life, this conversation had happened behind closed doors, completely verbal, leaving me with zero proof when they ambushed me. Now, it was stamped, sealed, and digitally archived in the cloud. I guess if Dad thinks it's okay, I stammered, playing the pathetic browbeaten stepdaughter to absolute perfection. Of course he thinks it's okay, Beatrice snapped, turning back to her design swatches as if I had already vanished from the room. Now be a dear and wipe down the counters. Chloe tracked mud from the balcony. Yes, Beatrice, I whispered. I turned around, walking toward the bathroom, but the moment I was out of their line of sight, the submissive slouch melted off my spine. I stood up straight, a slow, triumphant smirk spreading across my face. Let them plan. Let them call contractors. Let them order $50,000 worth of custom marble and imported quartz. That very night, after they had retreated to their respective rooms and the apartment was dead silent, except for Chloe's obnoxious, heavy breathing echoing through the thin walls, I took out my burner-adjacent phone and dialed a very specific, very important number, Mr. Henderson's private line. Mr. Henderson didn't like being disturbed after hours, but he liked unauthorized structural modifications even less. When his gruff, gravelly voice picked up on the third ring, I didn't use my normal, meek tone. I let my voice drop into a calm, professional, slightly distressed register. Mr. Henderson, hi, it's Harper from Unit 4B. I am so sorry to call so late, but I'm really panicking. My family members who are temporarily staying with me while their house is being treated, they've hired a contractor. They're talking about tearing out the load-bearing half wall between the kitchen and the living room tomorrow morning. They won't listen to me. They keep saying my father owns the building or has a secret arrangement with you. I had tried to tell them you'd never allow it. But they're bringing in sledgehammers at 8 a.m. Please, you have to help me. It's my lease on the line. On the other end of the line, there was a sharp intake of breath. The silence stretched for 3 agonizing seconds, and then Mr. Henderson's voice exploded through the speaker with enough fury to shatter glass. Tearing out a load-bearing wall without my explicit written authorization in my building? Yes, sir, I whimpered softly, playing the damsel in distress. They have contractors lined up and everything. They're spending tens of thousands of dollars on custom quartz and marble, and they keep saying they're taking over the lease. Put your father on the phone right now, Henderson bellowed, his voice practically shaking the drywall. My father isn't on the lease, Mr. Henderson. You know that. It's just me. Another pause. A heavy, dark realization settled over the landlord. Ah, right. The guarantor agreement expired with the old lease term, but your new renewal... Wait, your new renewal is solely in your name, correct? 2 years, fully paid ahead? Yes, sir, just my name. A cold, vicious laugh came from the other end of the line. Well, Harper, it sounds like your family is about to learn a very expensive lesson in property law. Do not stop them from starting the work. In fact, let them get right into the middle of it. Let them spend every last cent they have tearing it apart. I'll handle the rest. Thank you, Mr. Henderson, I whispered innocently. You're a lifesaver. I hung up the phone, stepped into the dark bathroom, and looked at my reflection in the mirror. The girl staring back wasn't the shivering, terrified ghost who died on the icy curb 3 months ago. She was the architect of her own survival. The trap was fully set. All that was left to do was watch them walk right into the middle of it. The transformation began on a crisp Thursday morning, heralded not by the polite knock of a professional, but by the abrasive, window-rattling roar of a pneumatic drill. I was sitting cross-legged on the gray sofa, nursing a cup of black coffee, when 2 burly men in neon yellow safety vests kicked my front door wide open without even bothering to knock. Leading the charge was a man with a clipboard, a permanent sneer, and a hard hat perched jauntily on the back of his head. Out of the way, kid, the contractor grunted, marching right past me as if I were a piece of stray furniture. We've got a half wall to drop and a kitchen to gut before noon. Beatrice glided out of the master bedroom a moment later, wrapped in a plush silk bathrobe, looking like an absolute general surveying her conquered territory. She took a sip of her artisanal matcha and beamed at the destruction. "Ah, marvelous. You're right on time, Marcus," Beatrice trilled, clapping her hands together. "Remember, I want the quartz countertops delivered by Friday afternoon at the latest. We simply cannot have raw plywood exposed when my ladies come over next week." "You got it, Mrs. Vance," Marcus replied, tipping his hard hat. "Your husband's corporate card cleared for the initial $50,000 deposit without a hitch. We'll have this place unrecognizable by Sunday." I kept my head down, staring intently into my coffee mug, biting the inside of my cheek so hard I nearly tasted copper to keep from bursting out in hysterical laughter. $50,000 for a deposit. In my past life, this exact moment had been a nightmare of powerlessness. I had screamed, I had threatened to call the police, and Beatrice had simply laughed in my face, calling me hysterical while my father told me to stop making a scene. They had gutted the place behind my back while I was at work, presenting me with a fait accompli that proved the apartment was no longer mine. This time, I wasn't just letting them do it. I was orchestrating the demolition schedule. Over the next 2 weeks, my 800-square-foot downtown loft turned into an industrial war zone, and I played the role of the terrified, defeated hostage to absolute perfection. Plywood sheets covered the floors. Dust hung in the air like a permanent gray fog, coating Chloe's ring lights and Beatrice's expensive skincare bottles in a fine layer of construction grit. The sound of sledgehammers slamming into drywall became our alarm clock. And the spending? The financial hemorrhage was a work of pure, unadulterated art. Beatrice and Chloe threw themselves into the renovation with the ferocious, hyper-fixated energy of apex narcissists. Every single day, massive delivery trucks pulled up to the building, dropping off imported Italian tiles, matte black designer fixtures, a ridiculously oversized smart refrigerator that barely fit through the hallway, and a custom deep-soaking clawfoot tub that required 4 men and a pulley system to haul up the stairs. They weren't just remodeling, they were staking a permanent claim. They were building their monument to supremacy over my life, brick by expensive brick, completely convinced that my father's phantom authority and their own unearned arrogance shielded them from reality. My job in all of this was wonderfully simple: compliance. Whenever the delivery drivers showed up while Beatrice was at her spa appointments, or Chloe was out filming TikToks in a nearby park, I was always there. I would wipe the dust from my hands, flash a sweet, helpless smile, and sign for the cargo. "Sign here, miss," the delivery guys would routinely prompt, handing over the digital clipboard. And I did, every single time. I didn't just sign. I made sure I was agonizingly thorough. When Marcus handed me the master contractor agreement and the formal liability waiver, pointing to the line marked "Client / Financier Signature," I didn't hesitate. I politely stepped aside and let Beatrice sign her own name in bold, looping, arrogant cursive across every legally binding document. Beatrice Vance. Not Richard Vance. Not my father. Beatrice. When the local plumbing supply company dropped off the unapproved custom fixtures, I made sure the invoice explicitly listed Beatrice's personal mobile number and her primary credit card as the billing source. When the city permit office mailed a notice regarding unpermitted structural modifications, I gently placed it right on the center of the kitchen island, right under a decorative bowl of lemons, where Beatrice couldn't possibly miss it. She just tossed it in the trash, scoffing about bureaucratic red tape. "City inspectors are just lazy bureaucrats who want a bribe," Beatrice dismissed airily one afternoon, waving a manicured hand as she examined the newly exposed brick wall where the half wall used to stand. "Your father handles all of that. Honestly, Harper, if you spent half the energy learning how the real world works instead of moping around on that wretched sofa, you might actually amount to something." "I'm sorry, Beatrice," I whispered, shrinking back like a whipped dog. "I'm sure you know best." "Of course I know best," she replied, not even looking at me. "Now go down to the lobby." The organic dry cleaner dropped off my silk blouses, and I refused to let them sit in the dust another minute. "Right away," I said. I grabbed my coat, practically skipping down the stairwell. Back in the apartment, Chloe was living her absolute best life, treating the chaos like the set of a reality television show. She had abandoned her bedroom entirely, taking over the newly expanded living space to film a multi-part vlog series documenting the luxury gut reno of her family's city pied-à-terre. "Hey guys, welcome back to day 12 of the Glow Up," Chloe chirped to her ring light one afternoon, striking a pose against the skeletal framework of the demolished wall. "People keep asking me how we managed to take over this gorgeous downtown loft from my totally useless stepsister. Honestly, it's all about manifestation and main character energy. She's basically our live-in maid now. It's iconic." I paused in the doorway, holding a stack of contractor receipts I needed to file away in my digital binder. I caught her eye in the camera's viewfinder. I didn't scowl. Instead, I let my lips part into a wide, dead-eyed, utterly blank stare, the exact look of a helpless victim. Chloe rolled her eyes, turned her back to me, and continued talking to her invisible internet audience about marble sealants. She had no idea that her main character energy was about to crash directly into a brick wall of federal and municipal property violations. By week 3, the financial drain had reached catastrophic proportions. Beatrice and Chloe had completely maxed out 3 of my father's corporate credit cards and had drained a staggering $85,000 from their joint liquid savings account. The apartment was unrecognizable. The old, modest layout was gone, replaced by an open-concept, ultra-modern, hyper-expensive shrine to bad financial decisions. The centerpiece of it all was the bathroom. They had torn out the old porcelain tub and installed a massive, heavy-duty soaking tub that took up half the square footage, surrounded by imported Italian marble tiles that cost more than a used car. The kitchen now boasted sleek quartz counters and high-end stainless steel appliances that practically hummed with expensive electricity. It was breathtaking. It was luxurious, and every single square inch of it was completely, unequivocally unauthorized. As the final touches were being hammered into place, Beatrice's mood shifted from arrogant control to manic, frantic excitement. The expiration date of the old lease, the 60-day mark I had been counting down to since the day I woke up back in my own bed, was now less than 48 hours away, and Beatrice had decided to celebrate. "We are throwing a housewarming gala," Beatrice announced at dinner one evening, slamming a stack of heavy, embossed cardstock invitations onto the kitchen island. She didn't offer me a seat. I was standing by the sink, quietly scrubbing a pan. "Next Thursday night, the exact night your little probationary lease expires, coincidentally." "A gala?" I asked, feigning mild cowed confusion. "Yes, a gala, Harper. Try to keep up," Beatrice snapped, her eyes glittering with manic triumph. "I've invited the entire social committee, a few local real estate developers, and all of our closest friends from the suburbs. I want them to see what real taste looks like in the city. And you?" She paused, eyeing my oversized knit sweater with open disdain. "You are going to stay in your room. Or better yet, go spend the night at a cheap motel. I will not have you wandering around looking like a sad orphan while my guests are touring the master suite." "Oh," I murmured, casting my gaze downward. "Where will I sleep?" "Not my problem, sweetie. By next Thursday, the paperwork transferring this entire unit into our official portfolio will be finalized. Your father promised me he'd force you to sign the quit-claim deed that very morning. So you won't even live here anymore." She picked up an invitation, admiring the foil stamping. "Consider this your eviction notice, darling. Pack your things in a garbage bag where they belong." I didn't answer. I just kept scrubbing the pan, letting the hot water run over my hands, hiding the terrifyingly wide, ecstatic grin that split across my face. Quit claim deed. Transferring the unit. Eviction. They were so high on their own supply of arrogance that they hadn't noticed the trap snapping shut around them. They thought they were holding all the cards. They thought they had won the game before the final whistle even blew. That night, after the contractors had packed up their tools, after Chloe had finally stopped screaming at her ring light, and after Beatrice had fallen into a deep, self-satisfied slumber in my stolen master bed, I sat at the kitchen island in the dark. I opened my laptop. I pulled up the encrypted digital folder containing every single piece of evidence. The motion-activated security camera footage of Beatrice plotting the land grab, the text transcripts, the contractor agreements bearing Beatrice's bold signature, the unpermitted structural violation notices, and the digital copy of the brand-new, ironclad 2-year lease renewal signed exclusively in my name. I drafted one final email. The recipient was Mr. Henderson, our brutally unforgiving landlord, copied directly to the city's Department of Building Violations, and a very specific municipal property litigator. Subject, Unauthorized substantial structural alterations and vandalism at Unit 4B. Dear Mr. Henderson, as per our previous discussions, the unauthorized, unpermitted demolition of the load-bearing half-wall and the installation of heavy plumbing fixtures in Unit 4B have now been completed by the uninvited occupants currently trespassing on the property. All contractor agreements, liability waivers, and financial transactions for these illegal alterations have been executed solely by Ms. Beatrice Vance, independent of any authorized leaseholder. Attached, please find the complete photographic and video dossier of the damages, along with a formal request for an emergency inspection and immediate legal eviction proceedings. Sincerely, Harper Vance, sole legal tenant and leaseholder. I hovered my mouse over the send button. I looked around the gutted, transformed, marble-lined apartment that used to be my quiet sanctuary. They had spent $85,000 of their own money. They had maxed out my father's cards. They had torn out walls, installed luxury fixtures, and thrown a multi-thousand-dollar renovation party right into the palm of my hand. I clicked send. The email vanished into the digital ether with a soft, satisfying chime. 7 days. Just 7 more days until the housewarming party. 7 days until the old lease officially died and the new reality began. I curled up on the lumpy gray sofa, pulled the thin blanket over my shoulders, and closed my eyes. The sound of the city outside was muffled, quiet, and peaceful. Let them plan their party. Let them invite their snobby friends. The stage was set, the trap was locked, and I was going to be the best damn host they ever had. The evening air outside carried a bitter autumn chill that bit right through the fabric of my heavy wool winter coat, but inside Unit 4B, the atmosphere was thick, suffocating, and dripping with imported champagne. It was Thursday night, exactly 60 days since Beatrice and Chloe had dragged their floral suitcases across my threshold, and precisely midnight on the final expiration date of the old co-signed lease. The apartment was unrecognizable. The demolished half-wall had opened the space into a sprawling, modern, entertaining area, currently packed to absolute bursting with Beatrice's wealthy, judgmental friends from the country club. Women in designer evening gowns clutched crystal flutes filled with vintage bubbly, their sharp, critical eyes scanning the custom Calcutta marble countertops, the newly installed smart appliances, and the velvet-upholstered furnishings. The noise level was a deafening wall of polite, aristocratic laughter, designer perfume, and superficial chatter about stock portfolios and summer homes in the Hamptons. And right in the dead center of it all stood me, Harper Vance, the designated background prop. I stood near the entryway, half hidden behind a towering, decorative fiddle-leaf fig tree, wearing my bulky winter coat zipped all the way to my chin, a knitted beanie pulled low over my forehead, and carrying a worn canvas tote bag. To anyone glancing our way, I looked like the pathetic, brow-beaten stepdaughter who had been banished to the fringes of the party, forced to run late-night errands or wait out the evening before being permanently kicked to the curb. Which, judging by the wicked, triumphant smirks Beatrice kept shooting my way from across the room, was exactly what she wanted them to think. She was holding court near the kitchen island, draped in a shimmering emerald cocktail dress that cost more than my first used car. Beside her stood Chloe, streaming live on her phone to her hundreds of thousands of followers, panning across the crowded room and narrating the grand social victory. Suddenly, Beatrice raised her hand, tapping a long manicured fingernail against the rim of her crystal champagne glass. Clink, clink, clink. The sharp, resonant sound cut through the roar of the party, instantly drawing every eye in the room. Conversations died down, heads turned. A hush fell over the expensive apartment, save for the low hum of the luxury refrigerator. Beatrice beamed, her face flushed with alcohol, power, and absolute, unadulterated arrogance. She swept her gaze across the room, letting it linger for a theatrical moment on me, standing quietly by the door in my heavy coat. Dearest friends, thank you all so much for celebrating this monumental evening with us. Beatrice began, her voice carrying that rich, dripping faux sweetness that made my skin crawl. As many of you know, this downtown space was, well, let's just call it a tragic, neglected little box when it first came into our family's possession. A few polite, sycophantic titters rippled through the crowd. Chloe giggled loudly behind the camera. Through a tremendous amount of vision, capital, and sheer willpower, not to mention a rather staggering $50,000 renovation investment orchestrated by my wonderful husband Richard and myself, we have completely resurrected this property into the urban sanctuary you see tonight, Beatrice continued, gesturing grandly to the marble counters and exposed brick. It took a lot of structural work, tearing out walls, replacing plumbing, redesigning the entire footprint from scratch. But we did it. She paused, locking her predatory eyes directly onto me, the smile on her face twisted into something sharp and cruel. "Which brings me to a rather delightful piece of housekeeping," Beatrice announced, her voice rising to a triumphant crescendo. "For the past 2 months, we have played host to a very ungrateful, unmotivated freeloader. My husband's daughter, Harper, has occupied a temporary probationary space here while trying to figure out her pathetic little life. Well, the probationary period officially ends tonight." Murmurs of shock and titillated gossip swept through the crowd. Several women pressed their champagne flutes to their lips, their eyes darting toward me with gleeful malice. "The old lease expires at midnight tonight," Beatrice declared, throwing her shoulders back like an empress issuing a royal decree. "Richard and I are officially transferring the title and lease into our permanent portfolio. And Harper, well, she's finally going to learn what it means to stand on her own 2 feet. She's been packed and ready to go for an hour." Beatrice pointed a single accusatory finger straight at me, standing frozen by the door. "So, darling," Beatrice purred, locking her gaze onto mine with venomous satisfaction. "The clock has struck. Your bags are packed. It's freezing outside, but I suggest you step out that door and find somewhere else to live. We are changing the locks the moment this party ends. Get out." The silence in the room became absolute. It was the heavy, breathless kind of silence that precedes a lightning strike. Chloe zoomed her phone camera directly onto my face, broadcasting my supposed humiliation to thousands of live viewers, waiting for the tears, the screaming, the pathetic begging she had scripted in her head. In my past life, this was the exact moment my soul had shattered. I had cried, I had begged my father's name, I had frozen to death on the icy pavement outside while they locked the door. This time, I didn't shed a single tear. Instead, I slowly unzipped my heavy winter coat. I let it slide off my shoulders, dropping it onto the entryway bench with a soft, deliberate thud. Underneath, I wasn't wearing a ragged hoodie or pajamas. I was wearing a tailored, charcoal gray pantsuit, my hair sleek and pulled back into a sharp, professional ponytail. A collective murmur of confusion rippled through Beatrice's audience. Beatrice's triumphant smile faltered for a fraction of a second, her eyebrows drawing together in sudden, irritated bewilderment. "What are you doing?" Beatrice snapped, her voice losing a fraction of its velvet polish. "I said, get out." "Get out?" I repeated, my voice clear, steady, and projecting effortlessly across the silent room. "Beatrice, that's such an inhospitable way to treat the sole legal tenant of this apartment." Beatrice let out a harsh, nervous laugh, glancing around at her friends. "Are you delusional? Your father is the guarantor. We are taking over the lease. You have no legal standing here whatsoever." "Oh, Beatrice," I sighed, stepping out from behind the fiddle-leaf fig tree and walking slowly toward the kitchen island, my heels clicking sharply against her expensive new floors. "You really should have read the fine print before you handed $50,000 to a contractor." I reached into the leather portfolio I had tucked under my arm, pulled out a crisp, heavy-stock legal document stamped with an official property management seal, and laid it flat on the pristine Calcutta marble right over her cocktail napkins. "What is this nonsense?" Beatrice hissed, snatching the paper up. Her eyes scanned the top lines, and I watched the color drain from her face so fast she suddenly looked like a ghost. "That," I said pleasantly, "is the brand new 2-year lease renewal for Unit 4B. Signed, sealed, and paid 6 months in advance. Executed exactly 60 days ago on the very day you moved in." Beatrice's hands began to tremble. Her eyes darted wildly across the text, finding the signature line at the bottom. There was no mention of Richard Vance. There was no guarantor. There was only one bold, undeniable signature: Harper Vance. This is fake," Beatrice shrieked, her voice cracking as panic clawed its way up her throat. "Richard said he told me he had the leverage. He said you were just a placeholder." "My father is a spineless coward who hasn't read a legal document in 30 years, I replied calmly. "And the old lease, the one he co-signed as a guarantor, expired at precisely midnight tonight. But my new lease? It's been active for 2 months. Which means right now, at this exact second, you, Chloe, and all of your judgmental little country club friends are standing inside my private, legally protected home without my permission." Chloe dropped her phone. The device clattered loudly against the floor, the live stream still rolling, capturing the sudden, chaotic pivot from a triumphant social flex into a full-scale panic attack. "Mom, what is she talking about?" Chloe whined, her voice pitching up into a hysterical squeak. Make her leave. Call Dad. Before Beatrice could stammer out another syllable, a heavy, authoritative knock echoed loudly against the front door. Bang, bang, bang. Everyone froze. The crowded room held its collective breath. I didn't wait for Beatrice to move. I strolled past her paralyzed form, reached out and pulled the front door wide open. Standing on the threshold was Mr. Henderson, our famously ruthless, ice-cold landlord, flanked by two towering, unamused police officers in full uniform. Mr. Henderson's face was twisted into an expression of absolute, apocalyptic fury, his eyes darting past me into the lavishly remodeled apartment. Harper, Mayor Henderson rumbled, his voice like grinding tectonic plates. Is this the property? Yes, Mr. Henderson, I said politely, stepping aside to let them in. Welcome. Please, come take a look at what my uninvited guests have done to your building. Mr. Henderson stepped over the threshold, his gaze sweeping across the demolished half wall, the custom Italian tile, and the massive, unapproved plumbing fixtures. For 3 agonizing seconds, the man looked like he was about to spontaneously combust. Who? Mr. Henderson's voice rose to a terrifying roar, echoing off the high ceilings. Who authorized this destruction? Beatrice staggered backward, clutching the countertop for support, her face the color of skim milk. Mr. Henderson, thank goodness. Richard, my husband, he spoke with you about routine maintenance. We are upgrading your building out of the goodness of our hearts. Mr. Henderson turned his blazing glare onto Beatrice, stepping forward until she shrank against the marble. Your husband has zero authority over this unit. The lease belongs exclusively to Harper. You have committed massive, catastrophic, structural vandalism on my property without a single permit, without my written consent, and without notifying management. Vandalism? Beatrice shrieked, her voice breaking into a jagged, hysterical octave. We spent $85,000 on this place. We put in marble. We put in quartz. We increased your property value by $100,000. You illegally gutted a load-bearing partition and altered the plumbing infrastructure, Mr. Henderson bellowed, his face turning purple. I am slapping you with a multi-million-dollar lawsuit for property destruction, breach of contract, and criminal vandalism so fast your head will spin. The party guests began scrambling toward the door like rats fleeing a sinking ship, shoving past each other in their expensive gowns and tailored suits, desperate to distance themselves from the legal disaster unfolding in front of them. No, wait, you don't understand, Beatrice cried out, her manicured hands flying to her face as she realized her entire social facade was crumbling into ash. She let us do it. She watched us pay for it. She's an accomplice. Actually, Beatrice, I interrupted, stepping forward with a bright, helpful smile, pulling a second piece of paper from my portfolio and handing it directly to one of the police officers. Here are the security camera transcripts, the contractor agreements, and the formal liability waivers. Every single dollar spent on this renovation, every single contract signed, every single material ordered was executed independently by Beatrice Vance, using her own credit cards and signature without my knowledge or consent. The officer glanced over the documents, nodded grimly, and stepped toward Beatrice and Chloe. Ma'am, the officer said sternly, resting his hand on his utility belt. You and your daughter are currently trespassing on private property, and you are facing severe civil and criminal charges for property destruction and fraud. I am going to have to ask you to vacate the premises immediately. Vacate? Beatrice screamed, her voice cracking into a ragged sob. We have nowhere to go. Our house is being fumigated. Our accounts... Richard says our accounts are frozen. That sounds like a personal problem, I said sweetly, walking over to the entryway and picking up their floral suitcases, carrying them over and setting them right outside the open front door on the cold, drafty landing. Get out, Mr. Henderson snarled, pointing toward the hallway. Panic took over. Chloe burst into a full-scale, mascara-running meltdown, howling and grabbing her mother's arm as the police officers gently but firmly guided them toward the door. Beatrice was trembling violently, her expensive emerald dress dragging across the construction dust on the floor, looking around wildly at the empty room where all her wealthy friends had abandoned her just moments before. As they were being escorted out into the hallway, Beatrice turned back, her eyes burning with pure, unmitigated hatred. You ruined us! You little monster, you planned this all along. I learned from the best, Beatrice, I smiled, leaning casually against the doorframe. And then, with a sharp, echoing click, I shut the door right in their faces. I locked it. 3 deadbolts. The apartment went dead silent. The champagne flutes were abandoned on the marble counter. The expensive designer coats were gone. The crowd had vanished. It was just me, the quiet hum of the city lights outside, and the sprawling, freshly remodeled luxury loft that was entirely legally and permanently mine. I walked over to the kitchen island, picked up a crystal flute of leftover champagne, and took a slow, delicious sip. Then I looked down at the marble countertops, the custom quartz, and the luxury soaking tub visible down the hall. Under the terms of the building lease and municipal property law, all unauthorized, permanent improvements made by trespassers defaulted directly to the property owner, or in this case, the legal leaseholder who inherited the leasehold improvements. Beatrice hadn't just bought me a free $85,000 luxury renovation. She had paid for my entire lifestyle upgrade out of her own pocket. I walked out to the balcony, sliding the glass door open just a crack. Down on the freezing street below, standing on the icy pavement in their glittering party dresses, shivering in the biting wind, with only their mothball-scented floral suitcases for company, were Beatrice and Chloe. They looked cold. Freezing, even. I raised my champagne glass toward the street in a silent, mocking toast. Then I stepped back inside, locked the balcony door, and sank deep into the warm, bubbling embrace of my brand-new, fully paid-for, custom-soaking tub. Rebirth really was a beautiful thing. The heavy oak door slammed shut, with a finality that echoed like a gunshot through the empty, marble-lined hallway. For a fraction of a second, the apartment was completely silent. The expensive scent of designer perfume, stale champagne, and lingering panic hung thick in the air. The glittering socialite gala had dissolved into a ghost town of abandoned crystal flutes and crushed cocktail napkins. Then came the muffled, hysterical shrieks from the other side of the deadbolts. "Let us back in right now, do you hear me?" Beatrice's voice cracked, turning into a frantic, animalistic screech as she hammered her manicured fists against the solid wood. "Harper, open this door! You can't do this to us! Police! Help us! They're locking us out!" "My ring light! My designer bags are still inside!" Chloe wailed, her voice pitching up into a deafening, high-pitched air raid siren of pure, unadulterated entitlement. "Mom, make her open the door. It's freezing. My dress is silk. I'm literally going to freeze to death." I didn't flinch. I didn't even turn around. I simply reached out, clicked the 3 heavy brass deadbolts into place with a series of heavy, satisfying clacks, and slid the security chain across the track. Out in the hallway, the pounding escalated into a frantic, chaotic frenzy. Footsteps stomped furiously against the floorboards. Someone, probably Chloe, given the dramatic flair, threw their entire body weight against the door in a pathetic attempt to break it down. But my new, upgraded lock system, installed by Mr. Henderson's commercial contractors last year, was built like a vault. "Ma'am, step away from the door immediately," one of the police officer's deep, authoritative voices boomed from the hallway. "You are officially trespassing. If you attempt to force entry or harass the legal tenant again, we will place you under arrest for disorderly conduct and property violation." "Arrest us? Do you know who my husband is?" Beatrice shrieked back, her aristocratic veneer completely shattered, replaced by the screeching panic of a drowning rat. "We live here. This is our home. That ungrateful little brat tricked us." "Step back, ma'am. Now, gather your luggage and clear the landing." I walked slowly toward the kitchen, my heels clicking softly against the pristine Calcutta marble floors that Beatrice had so generously funded. I poured myself a fresh glass of sparkling water, adding a twist of lemon, and leaned casually against the counter. Through the peephole, I watched the final act play out in the hallway. The 2 towering police officers flanked the elevators, their arms crossed, staring down the mother-daughter duo with cold, bureaucratic detachment. Beatrice, draped in her ruined emerald evening gown, was trembling so violently she looked like she had malaria. Her hair was coming undone, and her expensive makeup was streaked with angry, frustrated tears. Beside her, Chloe was huddled in a shivering, pathetic ball on top of their 2 floral suitcases, her bare shoulders exposed to the drafty, unheated apartment corridor, sobbing loudly into her diamond-encrusted clutch. "Going down?" the elevator bell chimed cheerfully. The door slid open. Without a word of hesitation, the police officers each grabbed a handle of the heavy floral suitcases, dragged them across the threshold, and unceremoniously dumped them onto the elevator floor. Then, they gently but firmly grasped Beatrice and Chloe by their bare arms and guided them inside. "Have a safe trip down to the lobby, ladies," the officer said flatly. No, wait, Richard, pick up your phone, Beatrice screamed, frantically dialing her husband's number for the 100th time as the elevator doors slowly slid shut, cutting off her hysterical screeching and sealing her fate in a descending metal box. I let out a long, slow breath, feeling a knot that had been coiled around my ribs for 3 months finally, completely deliciously untangle. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling glass balcony doors, unlatched them, and stepped out into the crisp, biting night air. The autumn wind whipped past my face, sharp and freezing, carrying the distant, muted hum of city traffic. Down on the street corner below, right where the bright yellow glow of the streetlight illuminated the curb, the front glass doors of the building swung open. Two small, glittering figures were shoved out onto the desolate sidewalk. Beatrice and Chloe stumbled backward, their high heels catching awkwardly on the uneven concrete. Their two massive, mothball-scented floral suitcases were dropped unceremoniously behind them by the building's security guard, who promptly locked the glass doors and pulled down the night security grate. From my vantage point on the third-floor balcony, looking down through the crisp night air, the symmetry of it all was breathtaking. It was an exact mirror image replica of the nightmare I'd lived through in my past life. 60 days ago, in that freezing winter timeline I had died in, I had been the one standing down there on the icy pavement. I had been the one shivering in my thin pajamas, staring up through the blinding snow at the warm, golden glow of my living room window, watching them sip wine while I froze to death on the curb. Now, the roles were reversed. They stood down there on the dark, unforgiving sidewalk, shivering violently in their sparkling, impractical party dresses. Chloe was jumping up and down, wrapping her arms around herself, sobbing into the cold air as her teeth chattered so loudly I could almost hear them from upstairs. Beatrice was pacing frantically, jabbing her trembling finger against her smartphone screen, completely unaware of the absolute financial apocalypse awaiting her call. Earlier that evening, right before the party started, Mr. Henderson's legal team had filed emergency fraud and property destruction liens against Richard Vance's primary corporate accounts. Combined with the massive chargebacks, bounced contractor payments, and sudden municipal fines, my spineless father's bank accounts had been frozen tighter than an iceberg within 10 minutes of the police arriving. They didn't just have nowhere to sleep. They had no money, no credit cards, no keys, and no shelter. They were utterly, beautifully, perfectly destitute. I leaned my forearms against the cold iron railing of the balcony, looking down at them like a queen surveying her banished peasants. I didn't feel pity. I didn't feel guilt. I felt a profound, radiant wave of absolute, unadulterated peace wash over the deepest corners of my soul. The ghosts of my past life. The hypothermia, the helplessness, the suffocating injustice of being erased by the people who were supposed to protect me finally dissolved into thin air. I was alive, I was warm, and I had won. Harper, I turned around, stepping back inside the warm sanctuary of the apartment and sliding the glass balcony door shut, locking the bitter wind outside where it belonged. The apartment was mine, every single square inch of it. The custom Calcutta marble countertops that gleamed under the soft, recessed lighting, the high-end stainless steel appliances, the sprawling, open-concept living area where their expensive, tacky velvet furniture still sat, furniture that now legally belonged to the property leaseholder under the building's abandonment clause. The luxurious, deep-soaking clawfoot tub waiting down the hall like a warm, inviting lagoon. And the best part? The rent was paid in full for the next 2 years. Not a single dime of my own money had gone toward the $85,000 of structural upgrades that now increased the value of my home. Beatrice had liquidated her own savings, maxed out my father's hidden cards, and bankrolled my entire lifestyle upgrade out of sheer, unbridled narcissism. I walked over to the kitchen, filled my favorite ceramic mug with piping hot chamomile tea, and dropped a spoonful of honey into the swirling golden liquid. I walked slowly down the hallway, kicking off my designer heels and letting my feet sink into the plush, dust-free floorboards. I pushed open the door to the master bedroom, my bedroom, and tossed my blazer over the back of the reading chair by the window. The king-sized bed was made, smelling faintly of crisp lavender linen and fresh fabric softener. There were no floral suitcases. There was no toxic perfume lingering in the air. There was only quiet, beautiful, absolute solitude. I sat down on the edge of the mattress, wrapped both hands around my warm mug of tea, and took a long, slow, luxurious sip. Down on the street below, far away through the double-paned, soundproof glass, A faint wail drifted up into the night as a taxi drove past them without stopping, splashing slush onto their designer shoes. I smiled, leaning back against the plush pillows, letting out a soft, contented sigh. Let them figure it out. Let them call my father. Let them wander the freezing city streets in their party dresses, reaping the exact harvest they had so painstakingly sown. I was safe. I was free. And for the first time in my entire life, I was truly home.